if you've already written your question down and you're comfortable with passing it down to the end of the aisle, John will come around and collect them. So if you wrote a question down, I just ask that you pass it to the end of the aisle or to be collected.
Anyone else with questions?
Anybody need an index card? Anybody need one?
Come on in, get out of the rain.
Anybody need an index card? Find a question down.
Give you USB adapter card.
We are 1 minute past 6 o'clock. We are just trying to work on the sound. If it was working, and you guys all showed up. We can stop. If we are not able to adjust the sound, I will do my best to project. It's also going to require each of us kind of making sure we minimize our noise. Now would be a good time to turn off your ringers to silent or off, vibrate. I am so thrilled that we have standing room only. I would ask if you feel comfortable and you're able-bodied and you see someone else who maybe isn't able to stand for the duration, then you'd be willing to give up your seat, only if you are comfortable and able. If you see someone that maybe isn't able to stand for the duration of the event and you are comfortable giving up your seat, you are willing to stand, not required, but simply if you are able, we would ask you to do so. I have to admit, I used to work as a teacher for a couple of years, and I'm just here to teach conference like this. For those folks who are not able to stand for the duration of the event, we have about 75 minutes together. There are a couple of seats. There are 2 seats back here, 4 seats back here in this corner. So please, if you're going to sit down, or if you gave up your seat and don't find it, a seat right here, 2 seats over here, 3 seats over here. So please, if you
We have one microphone.
one mic, okay.
I don't have enough power in mine because this one's dead, so I have to run out.
We'll be getting started momentarily. Ma'am, if you want to read, ma'am. There's a lot of ma'ams in here. Green sweater, white t-shirt. You were one of the early arrivals. You can reclaim your seat. You got open seats. You gave up your seat. If you
Gave up your seat, and there's still open seats. We just wanted to make space for people who couldn't stand. Thanks for coming. Good evening. My name is Ladrina Wilson, and I serve as the moderator this evening. I come to you as a Davenport citizen, but I also come to you as a citizen who has been
impacted, or what we refer to as justice impacted. Sometimes that means you are on one side of the law or the other. In my circumstances, I would say I've been on both.
Here as a Davenport resident, I've had my car stolen. My sister-in-law's car was stolen as well in front of my home a few weeks later, so close in fact, that she thought I was playing a trick on her when she walked outside and her car was gone. I've also been robbed at gunpoint in my own backyard. So I've been a victim. family members who are just as impacted and on the other side of the law, who have committed crimes and in some ways have been dehumanized as a result of that. And through all that, I learned this.
We're all neighbors. Every one of us is going to come back into our community in some shape, form, or fashion, whether you've been victimized or whether you've been on the wrong side of the law. We're all still going to have to coexist together. So hopefully tonight is an opportunity for us to better understand the current state of our youth justice system. And it's hopefully also an opportunity for us to come in and seek understanding, not only just to be understood. So it's about listening, it's about asking tough questions, asking good questions, not coming in with your mind made up, but seeking clarification. So hopefully we can debunk some of the myths, but also put some information out there that maybe you weren't aware of, or perhaps you were aware of. And so I think we have the right group of people here today who are close to the issue, both from a policy perspective, but also from an implementation perspective. So with that, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping things, and then we will jump right in. First and foremost, there are refreshments in the back, but at this point, with how many people in here, it might be awkward to get to them. But you are welcome to them. You are welcome to them at any point. The restrooms are located just behind us, so feel free to quietly slip back if you need. There's also a drinking fountain back there for some reason. You need some water. Okay. If you are not comfortable standing and you would like to still participate, this event is being streamed on Facebook Live through Davenport Bearing Witness's Facebook page. So if you feel like you want to participate but you're not comfortable standing, that's another option for you. We also will have forums tomorrow at 8 a.m. at EICC's Curvin campus, down just 1 block, what is that, south? Yeah, south and about 2 blocks east. Okay. So we'll have a forum tomorrow at 8 a.m. as well as 11:30. Okay, so that's for your information. If you have questions, they're going to be channeled through me. If you have an index card, John is going to come around down the aisle, pass your card all the way down the aisle to the end. John is wearing the yellow button-up with the black vest. He will collect your questions, and then he will forward them over to me. We have a number of people here. Not everybody's question will get asked, but we're going to open up with some general information, and perhaps some of your questions may get answered. If not, you are welcome to, after this event, go back onto that Facebook Live event. You can still go back in and access it. If you have additional questions, we'll do our best to follow up and try to get information to you. The last thing that I do want to let you know is we have about 2 or 3 youth who are here that I am going to have to give an opportunity to speak at the very end of the program. And part of why I'm doing that is because oftentimes, as adults, we are positioned to make decisions that impact the youth, and they don't get a voice. They don't get a voice in it. And ultimately, they are here to live with the decisions. They will be living with ramifications that are made today, decisions that are made today, far longer than we will. And so I think it's important that they have an opportunity to just have a little bit of space in this conversation. I also invite you to remember that Dr. Martin Luther King became an activist at age 20. He did not wake up one day and his feet hit the ground and he became the great Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King. He had experiences like this that prepared him for that moment. So I want to create that for some of our youth here in this community, and I hope you understand and appreciate that. Okay, fair enough? All right, let's keep going. So today we have Mike Duster, President of the NAACP 4019 local chapter here in Davenport. Mike is going to tell us a little bit more about himself, but he's also part of the Quad Cities Juvenile Justice Coalition. Spent 38 years in the federal service and is now here in our community and has experience from all over the country. We have, I'm not going in the right order here, we have Marcy Mistrick. She has 30 plus years in youth development, youth organizing, and she's also a national trainer. She's currently the director of the Youth Justice, Youth Justice Excellence Sentencing Project in Washington, D.C. We have Scott Hobart, who's the Chief JCO of the 7th Judiciary District. He's worked in the field from youth services and social work for 35 plus years. And we have Jerry Kaiser, who also has a wealth of experience in youth services, starting off at Family Resources back in 2001, and now serving as the Scott County Juvenile Detention Center and Diversion Program Director. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. We have one microphone, so just be patient with us. They're each going to give one brief introduction of themselves, and then we'll jump into some of the questions. I do want to let you know I have a couple of questions to kick us off. You see me use my phone. I'm not texting or on Facebook. My questions are...
Thanks, Ajay. Before I introduce myself, I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight on a rainy night. I know there's lots of other things you guys could have been doing, but I think everyone in this room, I think what it shows is, number one, you care about your community, so thank you for that. And number two, you care about knowing more than just face value. I think that there's been a lot of information that's being spread that sort of oversimplifies a very complex issue. So I commend all of you for coming out to learn more about a very complex issue.
Like Ladrina said, my name is Jeremy Kaiser. I'm the Director of Scott County Juvenile Detention and Diversion Programs here in Davenport. I've been in my current role over 12 years. During my time at Juvenile Detention, it's been my focus to work on community-based programs and implementing new detention alternative programs and diversion programs. So since I began in 2009 downtown, I've implemented 5 separate programs here, and they're all aimed at keeping kids out of detention. So, you know, when people say, oh, well, they just want to detain and throw away, lock them up and throw away the key, I don't think that's very fair, and I don't think that's very accurate. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have tonight. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Scott Hobart, and I'm the Chief Juvenile Court Officer of the 7th Judicial District. And as Ladrina said, I've had a pretty diverse career in my life, but as we sit here tonight, it kind of struck me, I've spent my whole career trying to keep kids out of detention or have them go for a shorter period of time and be successful in the community. I'm hoping I learned as much from you folks tonight as I can share with you. I think the more open we are to one another's opinion, the better off we're going to be at the end of the night. And so I hope to walk out here a little smarter at the end of the night. Good luck on doing that.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everybody. My name is Marcy Mistrat, and I flew in this morning from Washington, D.C. So great to see so many people in the community. This is actually my second visit here to Davenport in the past 3 months. So it's nice to see some familiar faces now. I work in a national organization called the Sentencing Project. It's an advocacy and research organization. But I'm a trained social worker, so I have worked with young people directly most of my career. I've only been in policy work about a quarter of my career. And so I am not here to be an expert in Iowa. You guys are the expert in your own community. I have been asked to share both research and data nationally so that you can kind of see where Iowa is in the big picture globally. Thank you.
Good evening. I just want to thank each of you for coming out tonight and being here for such an important matter and talking about this detention center, to have a very candid and honest conversation. I can say that I'm happy to be here with each one of these panelists. I've worked with Jeremy through the auto theft program, where we have tried to work with youth, and I know Jeremy's passion for this, so I know that he wants to work in the right direction in a restorative manner. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I come out of Alabama in the 60s, and I've been involved with all kind of marches for justice, injustice, and through many communities around the country. And still today, as the president of the NAACP here in Davenport, we still are fighting different various things, but I'm happy to be here tonight to have this conversation regarding the Juvenile Detention Center.
Thank you. So what I'll do is I'll start with you, Marcy, and then many of the questions that I had as drafts to get us started questions everybody already asked, so we're all on the same page. Marcy, you bring the national perspective and have extensive background in a history on current as well as historic juvenile justice practices or youth justice practices. As it relates to where Scott County falls within the state or maybe in national juvenile incarceration, what would the community need to know about where we stand in comparison to the state and maybe in the country?
You gonna give me more than 1 minute? Adriana told me I have 1 minute. 1 minute. Okay. So data and research are two things that are very hard to come by a lot of the time, right? In Scott County, you guys do have an annual diversion and detention report, so I encourage you to dig into that because there's a lot of important information in there. So I'd say it's good. Iowa, and this county in particular, is willing to put that in a public place, which gives us answers. What I will say is that there's a lot of information that's not there statewide, right? And so we need to make sure when we have data, we're not only looking at one point in time, but we're looking at things over time and we're looking at various data points. So there's a couple things I can tell you about Iowa and some things about Scott County compared to the country. First, your youth population is in decline, right? Youth are making up a smaller part in Iowa of the overall population. There's about 20,000, a little bit less than 20,000 kids in Scott County. And when I'm saying children, I'm saying ages 10 to 17, because those are the children that are likely to be impacted by the justice system. This is comparable to the state of Mississippi. So I'm just using those numbers so that you have a comparison point. So the youth population is declining. The youth incarceration rate is increasing compared to the national data. So the United States is a global leader. We incarcerate more children in the United States than anywhere else in the world. Okay, and that is even after we've closed half of the facilities in our country over the past 20 years. We've closed half of our carceral youth facilities in our country over the past 20 years, and we are still a leader in the world.
And nationally, we lock up about 114 children for every 100,000 that there are. In Iowa, that is 133 children, so it's elevated. It's higher than the national average. In Mississippi, same size, 61. Okay? In detention, Iowa is about the same, so it's detention, just as a word, means it's kind of like a jail. It's pre-trial. You get sent there when you're accused, but not found guilty of anything, right? And the juvenile justice system we call commitment is kind of after you've been found guilty of something, okay? And nationally, so detention, Iowa is right on par at about 45 children for every 100,000. Mississippi is half of that at 26. And then in terms of the commitment or the after you've been found guilty, nationally it's about 66 kids for every 100,000. Iowa's at 75, so that's elevated again. Mississippi's at 30. Okay? In terms of kids in adult jails, now this is every single state in the country sends some children to the adult court. Okay, so they are stripped of any childhood protection and they are treated as though they were adults. In many states, this is for children as young as 10. In Iowa, I think they can't do it. They can't leave anyone under 14, right? Right. And so in terms of kids in adult jails, a third of the states have 0 children in their adult jails. Places like Kentucky, Idaho, North Dakota. Another 8 have less than 15 in the entire state. Iowa, double that, 34. Racial disparities, also increasing here in Iowa. In the state, Iowa is one of the only 10 states that increased their disparities, racial disparities in the past 40 years. Not only did it increase in Iowa, but it increased by 20%. Iowa is sending black children at an increased rate of 20% than what they were 4 years ago. That means that black youth are it's 8.7 times, or almost 9 times as likely than their white peers to be incarcerated. Similar behavior, incarceration rates radically different. In Scott County, if you look at the incarceration rate for black youth and divide that by the black population, that's about 1 in every 22 black kids get detained, 1 in every 457 white children, right? Lastly, the rates of children that are charged adults also increasing. Again, nationally, we dropped the number of kids charged adult by a whopping 80% over the past 2 decades. However, in Iowa, third. You send only behind Alabama and Maryland. In Scott County, which is I think 1/3 of Polk County, you guys send more kids to the adult system in this county than in either of those counties. Over the past 4 years, more than 500 of Scott County children have been treated as older adults. 500. Okay, one more. So when you look at all of that together, all of that data, youth population is declining, youth incarceration rate is higher than national, racial disparities is increasing higher than the national, and rates of children charged as adults increasing and charged as national. That is a picture that we need to ask ourselves why that is happening. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you. Well, so I think this is a nice segue, and it covers a few of the questions that came in. I'm going to combine some questions, so hopefully you hear the essence of what you were trying to get at through your questions. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I'm going to go over to you, Scott, because they're relevant. Mike, the NAACP, Marcy's talked quite a bit about inequities, but the NAACP has partnered with the county as the expansion of this facility has been conceptualized. The NAACP as well as others. From your recollection, can you tell me a little bit about who is on that committee and what organizations are represented? And you guys might help them with that because I know there's several. But what are the hopes that you have to overcome some of the inequities, especially along racial lines that we see in our system? And do you see these solutions taking place inside, outside, or both inside and outside of this new proposed facility?
Thank you. As far as the groups, I know that I can't repeat them all, but I know the NAACP, LULAC, Faith Group, Scott County Detention Center, the Scott County, what was that? Violent Crime Commission were part of that group. When we talk about what we would like to see come out of it, I think from the perspective of the data that Marcy has presented, we can't continue to lock up black children and expect to have a good positive outcome in anything. That's why we're probably where we're at today. I think we would be better served with a smaller detention facility, 24 probably 28 max beds, with diversion programs, with community type programs, intervention, things that are going to help these kids. And I believe that it all starts with education. When we see K through 12, when we look at a child that's in kindergarten and the school system begins to put minor offenses on their records with respect to a child didn't get off the playground equipment when I said, that's ludicrous. And when you look at a child in the second grade, Johnny hit Sally. Well, let me tell you, young kids at home hit their siblings all the time. So, you know, that's minor stuff, but it's on a record. And to me, that's a criminal record already starting for these kids in school. And so that has to be eliminated. Zero tolerance policy has to be eliminated. So education is the key to begin to eliminate a lot of this. So we would have to start from inside and outside, and then we've got to have more parental involvement. It has to be. You can't come to school when a child gets suspended or expelled and want to jump on everybody in the school because your child got suspended or expelled and you haven't been to the school all year long. And I know somebody's going to get upset about this, but you've got to be involved in your child's education all year long. That is important, folks. So, and I'm going to get off my soapbox here and stuff, but, and then we need the faith-based community to step up and be involved in this process as well. Thank you.
So I will try to separate these two. Scott, I'll start with you. You, in your role, have more influence, I guess. Maybe that's the wrong word. But how the kids get into this facility that Jeremy's the director of is where your roles kind of intersect. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about some of the disparities. It looks like there's some collaboration that's happening, so that's a good thing. Can you talk to us a little bit about what processes are in place right now in terms of how youth end up in the current detention facility? And then I'll follow up with you, Jeremy, on some of the, talking about some of the misconceptions there are about this proposed plan.
So, that's a big question, but what I would tell everybody, what I would tell everybody is that we, juvenile court services, starts out in the Okay, good. Juvenile court services, speaking of education, we have 6 juvenile court school liaisons in the school to work with at-risk kids and to work with kids that are on our caseload. We also have several diversion programs that we've got going in the past few years. The Scott County diversion program is pre-arrest. So when Mike talks about kids coming in and getting a record over minor things, right now in Scott County, cannot be charged at the first time with a simple misdemeanor. Simple misdemeanor goes to a diversion program. We're working closely with the police department. They're not charged with that as a crime. Our diversion is a mix of juvenile court services officers and police officers and community members. And we have a recidivism rate that's about 1/3 of what a youth that gets charged in the community with that same and receives a charge. I am one, and I'm a firm believer, that when youth walk into our office, it raises their risk level. So our number one goal is to keep them out of our office. But we do, and we also implemented in 2007 and in 2014 and went live, the Iowa Delinquency Assessment Tool. What that does is it takes any bias that you might have out. It may take your anger over a crime. It may take any feeling that you have out. It's a standardized test that we use across Iowa. And what that's done is really cut down the amount of detention that we're doing. It was much higher in the past. I do have concerns about the system, and I have very big concerns about the system. And some of them are, once the kids reach the congregate care level, we're putting kids that are child welfare youth. We're putting kids. Yes, that's residential treatment, QRTPs. And I don't know if you're including that in your incarceration. Is that part of what you were talking about? Okay, so that, when you talk about incarceration, that includes our child welfare youth. That includes our. What about the youth that become delinquent in care? Because that's about 30% in some parts of the state. Yes. So that's my concern. We're mixing and matching our population in Iowa. what we're doing is we're exposing, there's something we call peer contagion. And what we're doing is we're exposing these kids to one another and the behavior that they're having. And what's that doing? Driving a lot of child welfare youth into our system and really creating a problem there. So there's issues we need to work on, and there's issues that I think we can get out of JCS, and that's what we're here to learn.
Thank you. This is going to be two parts because it's piggybacking off of what Scott has said. It says, Jeremy, how many of the diversion programs you started, congrats and thanks, how many could use more funding?
All of them. Funding is always the biggest issue for what we're up against. I can tell you our newest program, the one that I'm most excited about right now, is a school-based restorative mediation program in which I actually have our detention staff that go out into the schools and help mediate fights. One of our facilitators right here tonight, Keith Sutton, excellent worker with youth. The schools rave about Keith. Anyway, so I can tell you that since we began this program, referrals started to trickle in, and then they got more, and then they got more. And we're at the point now where we're absolutely inundated with the fights that are happening in the schools, where we will regularly receive up to 7 referrals from secondary schools on a daily basis for fights that are occurring in middle schools and high schools. Okay, so what our whole point of this is to try to disrupt the school to prison pipeline. I don't know if anyone has read anything about this, but
They haven't read it, there's people in this room, this kids are part of it.
okay, there we go. So our whole point is we don't want these kids to be suspended from school. We don't want them to be expelled. We want them in the classroom because research says the more they stay in the school, the more likely they are to graduate. The more likely they are to graduate, they're going to stay out of crime, right? So we're rolling up our sleeves, right? We're trying to get upstream, and we're trying to get to these kids sooner. I can tell you since this program began the beginning of this year, which wasn't that long ago, mid-August, so we've been operating for 2 months, we've already served 131 unduplicated youth in our secondary and high schools. That's different youth who have been in fights in the schools that would have been suspended or expelled due to their fights. So when we're out there, we're working with these kids. The whole point is we want the schools to use in-school suspension. We bring in a mediator. We meet with each child separately, talk about the issues, and then we bring the kids in together to talk together so they can learn to solve their violence or solve their issues without the use of violence. And we've actually started to see progress with them learning in the schools, and they're actually starting to use some of the skills that we're teaching when we're in there. So we're funded by DCAT. Through Scott County Kids, we have a $100,000 budget. I can tell you, I can easily double that, and we will have the need. The need is there. It's always funding is what we're in need of.
So a follow-up question that came from the audience in response to this too is, why are the funds not being used toward more prevention when detention centers are proven to not work as well as community-based actions? I'm going to let you answer that, but there's another similar related question. Actually, you know what, I'll just
Sure, thanks. It'll be easier if we just go one question at a time, honestly. So I think that's probably the biggest misconception, right? Is like, we're not using any funds for early intervention. We absolutely are. In fact, Scott County Board just committed $700,000 over the next 5 years to implement the youth assessment program in the community. That is a community partnership that we work with through the city of Davenport. The city of Bettendorf is here tonight. John Deere committed money. We got together $2.5 million, okay, to provide a local early intervention and prevention program where kids are assessed for their issues earlier. And anyone in this room can make a referral to this program. You don't need to commit a crime. They don't need to be referred through the child welfare system. They can be referred to the youth assessment center. Our youth assessment program. We have our staff making referrals as well. And those kids can go there, they can be assessed, and they can be plugged into the proper services. So when we're looking at our local system, we're saying, what do we need here? Okay, what we came up with is, what we decided is there's a lot of services that are available, but families are struggling to find them. And when they do find them, they're not finding the right ones. So we're following models that are across the United States. We went to go look out in Colorado at a youth assessment center, and very impressed with the work that they're doing, and they're helping to lower detention rates with that as well.
So I'm just going to let you know, I observed Mike and Marcy feverishly jotting down things while you were talking, so I'm going to let them respond as well as you, Scott. Okay, I'll start with Marcy, then Mike, and then you last time.
So one of the reasons, I want to say thank you to Jeremy and to identify a need in the community. Restorative practice is 100% a really, really important and improved strategy for schools and to kick kids out through suspension and expulsion. And the fact that him and his team, he was willing to use his team to go to schools is great. So I say great to that. What I do want to say is the reason that we talk about minimizing the cost of detention, other than the fact that we know any touch with formal processing in the courts it leads kids to more crime. As a matter of fact, if you do nothing, this is a long study, long time, many kids, different states, I can go on and on, but any touch with the courts increases your likelihood of your future touch with the courts. And so while we want restorative practice, we don't want it in elementary school. It's not a good thing that the school is saying to Jeremy every 5 minutes, come and take care of these second graders hitting each other. Hopefully that will transition now that we have an assessment center that the school will call the assessment center. Because any touch is a touch too many. Those restorative justice programs are really important. They're relatively inexpensive, but it's not just about coming to intervene in a fight. It's about the culture and the value of that school to say, we are not going to expel you. And schools right now have gotten the biggest amount of funding ever in history. For them to fail to use that money to check their own values and say, we out of values and principle are not going to expel our children, we're going to love them, we're going to send them to assessment before we have to call in somebody that works at the detention center to contain 3rd and 4th graders from hitting teachers and having a traumatic response to 2 years of a pandemic. So it's not saying, I appreciate that he is calling the answer. It's responding to a call from schools. But we need to push the schools to live their values.
Can I just say one thing? Just for clarification, I heard you say you were working secondary, intermediate and secondary. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I cleared that up.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that I heard correctly. When you said that the county is allocated $700,000 a year over 500?
5 years, 700,000.
Over 5 years. Okay. I'm not going to say anything else.
I just wanted to add, I've been in this job since 2008. When I first got here, we had charges coming out of the schools like you wouldn't believe. We had charges coming out of residential treatment centers. We had kids being charged for behaviors in schools, just like Mike was talking about. That's gotten a lot better. We can always get better with that. But we're still in a position where we have gaps in our programming in the community and in the congregate care system. And we're in a situation where if you give somebody a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And juvenile justice is often that nail or that hammer. So what I'd say is we've made a lot of progress, and we've worked with the Department of Human Services, and we're really trying to work and get better at assessment-driven care for kids. And I think when we start really assessing what's under, I always say what's under the hood, what's going on with that youth, and we treat that. The youth assessment program is going to be a great deal. Our liaisons work right in the high schools with Jeremy's staff. But we can get better at this, and we will. I mean, I think now we're in a lot better spot because we can assess what's going on. We know trauma in a youth looks a lot like anger, and it looks a lot like a behavior problem. We know that kids suffering from depression, from anxiety, that looks a lot like a behavioral issue. And way too often, that's what happens is we get the referral before there's a referral to a counselor. So I think community awareness and really keeping the training out there with all the professionals working so that, you know, juvenile court services can wrap our arms around a youth who really has some criminal thinking going, has some high criminogenic risk. And if we really do our jobs, we can have them go on their way after a very brief time. But we don't want it to get that far. And I think right now our system is clogged with kids who've been misidentified as criminal thinkers because their behavior and their symptoms are very extreme. So that's one thing I think, and we're working on. And juvenile court, we have over $1 million a year for this district, which is the 5-county region around Scott County. And a good portion of that money does go towards prevention. And I work closely with Nicole Mann, who's sitting over there. And my biggest question is, how do we, in a non-threatening way, engage families and get them the resources they need so that they can feel more trusting about what we can give them, and so that we can get to the bottom of it. And before these problems happen, way too often we get youth who've sat for, you know, from the age of 5 up to 15, and there's been problems in the family, problems in the community, and we haven't had a chance. And so when we go back at that point, it's really too late.
Thank you. So I have a follow-up question on that. So I heard you say there's some kinks in the chain, kind of condensing that, but I also hear you say that it's at the point of how folks, whether it's in schools or other aspects of the community, are interpreting children's behaviors. Is any funding going to training for cultural competency, trauma-informed care, as part of the county dollars, or are you aware of that?
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So the decategorization project exists in Iowa to prevent youth from coming into the child welfare or the juvenile justice system. Right now, and I'm looking over at Nicole, they have trauma-informed care. What's the name of your program when there's trouble at home and the police and the schools informed? Handle with care. There's a lot of trauma-informed activity going around right now. We are working right now with Frank Gravelia, who's going to come train our staff, who's a nationally known trauma-informed therapist. So we really want to get better and better at that.
I'm going to move us to some questions about the center, because I know people have some explicit questions about the center. We may circle back to that in just a moment. But there are a lot of thoughts, beliefs, misconceptions, and so I want to give space for us to have some opportunity to talk about, you know, how the need for the center was assessed, as well as there are lots of different numbers being thrown around in terms of the capacity. And so I'm going to just turn it over to you and share what you think we need to know to kind of debunk some of the myths or inform people with more information than maybe what they already have.
Thank you. So let me just first start by saying this is about an hour and a half long presentation that I'm going to try to squeeze into about 3 to 5 minutes. So bear with me. Okay, probably 3, as many as she gives me, I guess. So I'll just hit the main points here. So the main thing is folks need to know the law is changing, right? So last year, Senate File 357 was signed by Governor Reynolds on April 30th, which stated that we can no longer hold adult waiver youth in jails. We have to hold them in juvenile detention centers. Don't get me wrong, this is a good thing, okay? That was a good thing. This mirrors language from the federal JJDPA, Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act. Sorry, that's a lot. It's a mouthful. So this is a good thing. Why? Because they are going to receive more services when they're with us. They're going to go to an educational program. They're going to have an opportunity to start working towards their GED if they so choose, or if they're in a good place. They'll have an opportunity to have more staff interaction, more positive interactions, develop staff rapport, things like that, and learn from their choices, right? They're not just going to be in a jail anymore. So this is a good thing. However, we do not have room currently in our facility to accommodate the need. So my job as county, we are bound by state code and we are bound by federal law, okay? So as a county, we are the end user. It is our job to detain those that the judges say need to be detained. I don't control who comes in. I don't arrest them, and I don't order them into detention. I also don't determine how long they stay there, okay? My job is to make sure that we have the resources and the staffing and the spaces for the demand. So over the last 5 years, between our average daily population, which has been around 12 or 13, plus the jail's average daily population, which is about 12 or 15, or 12 or 13, we're averaging about 25 youth per day over the last 5 years. And this isn't 5 years ago, this is right now. I have 12 in my building right now. The jail has 12 in their building right now. As of December 18th of this year, all 24 of those youth become mine overnight, and I don't have space for it. I don't. Okay, so that creates an overnight crisis for us with the county. That's why this is our the board's number one strategic item, is to deal with juvenile detention space. Okay, so how did we get to average daily population of 25 to a facility size of 40? So when you're looking at facility size, okay, what you don't want to do is build it just big enough for average, because what's the average? The middle, right? So we want to build it big enough to accommodate the peaks as well as the valleys. So generally speaking, when you're building a new facility, you build for the average plus 20% for peaks in population, and then an additional 20% for what's called classification and separation requirements, which is just a big term for we have to keep some of the kids separate from each other. Okay, PREA law, Prison Rape Elimination Act, was passed back in 2003, has very specific requirements about what type of youth can be housed in the same areas as others. We also have to keep rival gangs separate. I have youth that come in who may have shot at each other the night before. I have youth that the judges say cannot be around each other because they're co-defendants, so I have to separate them. These are all things we have to do. And just speaking as a facility administrator and working in correctional settings for 20 years, I can tell you a full program is an unsafe program, okay? So we want to make sure that we're building with enough space, enough capacity to accommodate the demands, accommodate the peaks, and also deal with the classification and separation requirements. And what that kind of means is, the analogy that I use is like a hospital, right? A hospital may have 100 beds, right? And then people always ask hospital administrators, are you full? Are you full? Well, they're never going to be at exactly 100, right? Because you have different units. So like you may have a COVID unit, you may have a cardiac unit. You can't just move a person from a cardiac unit into a COVID unit, right? Because then they can become infected. So what we're trying to do is separate kids out and do it safely. So that's how we came to 40. And I can talk more about the JDAC if you want me to, but the group that met to.
Yeah, just give us a little brief summary of the group.
Okay, so Mr. Gusser already spoke briefly about the Juvenile Detention and Alternatives Advisory Committee that met. We had 6 meetings that were 2 hours each. We had all local juvenile justice experts were in the room. We had judges, we had the county attorneys, we had juvenile court services, we had also, we had other organizations, NAACP, LULAC, faith-based, all in the room to sit and talk. And we met 6 times for 2 hours each, and we dove in deep, and we talked about all these issues and where we need to be and how big the facility needs to be and what are the hallmarks of it, what are the things that we want to be included, and this is what we came up all together collectively. And so I was
I learned a lot with being in that group, and the folks really came together, and there was a lot of collaboration, and I was glad we were able to come to that, so thank you.
I can speak before Marcy take my words. But Jeremy, I don't want you to take this so personal, but when we talk about the number of beds, the number 60 has been floated, and that's what I've seen. And certainly, the requirement is nowhere near there. Secondly, when we talk about diversion programs, none of the money that we talk about is money that the county has allocated. And so when we talk about wanting to spend money to build a jail and then another, I think it was about $2 million, another $1.5 million to maintain it a year, that money to me could be used for diversion. And when Iowa is already in the top 5, you know, that's just an incentive to put more black youth in jail. And then, if you're not utilizing that space, it then serves as a hub to bring more black youth from around the state and to fill the detention center. And so that, we need to try to keep that number low so that we can utilize diversion programs, intervention programs, so that we can keep this number or erase that number or get out of the top 5, top 10 of jailing youth. So, and I don't want you to take that personally, but I got to push back against the number of beds that we talk about.
That's good, thank you. I also don't want you to get defensive, because I think both Scott and Jeremy are talking about the realities of where they sit in the system, right? So first of all, that JJDPA bill, I was the one that lobbied it. I was the one that got it over the literal hill in Congress. I know it intimately. My question is this, and this is a question that's not being asked. The question is this: how do we get the numbers down? Is there some zombie apocalypse that's dealing with Scott County kids only? Your kids in Scott County are no different in their behavior and attitudes than anywhere else I go. I do not believe that the children of Scott County are any different. What is different is that there is no one, and I'll tell you, the only thing that the juvenile justice system never says no. It doesn't. It is designed not to say no. They can't say no. Where are they going to say no to? There's no one else to send kids to. That is not their role. But until we as the community, or you as the community, say, what else can we be doing? Why do we have such a high rate of kids? Why do we have so many kids in the adult system? They're not going to prison. I'll tell you that. Look at the numbers. They're not going to prison. What can we do to narrow their front door? What Jeremy is saying is real pressure for him, but what aren't we doing at the front end? There's no way that the kids in Scott County are worse or behave differently than kids in the rest of the country.
So again, I couldn't agree more. So it's tough to debate when you agree, but the issue isn't an either or, I don't think. I think we're putting this in a situation where it's, well, if we build this, we can't have diversion. If we build a detention center, what I can tell you, if we don't have capacity in beds, because I've lived it, I ran the detention center before Jeremy did, and I lived through 2 expansions of the detention center. And what happens when it's full, like Jeremy's talking about, is chaos. And what happens is kids get parceled out to different detention centers around the state, as Mike said, and that just raises their risk level. What we need is a right-sized center with the cushion. In 2017, we had a rash of car thefts. I'm sure you all remember. And we went from around 270 or 250 felony charges in Scott County all the way up to 400 in 1 year, and then the following year it was 300. So what we had was a rash of felonies, and we had kids that were going all over the state, and that did not help them. That doesn't help not to have the capacity. We can have both. We can do diversion. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. I'm with the whole panel in saying we want to keep this. We want to build the diversion. We've been building the diversion, and we've done some really good things with it. But we can do both, and safely for the community.
Yep. I have a question for you too about what will happen in the facility, and maybe it'll talk to some of those programs. So I'll let you respond.
So yeah, just real quickly to respond to Mr. Guster's comments. The reason why you heard 60 beds is because we had an independent firm come to Scott County, Justice Planners for North Carolina, and they ran all their fancy instruments and took a look at all the data, and what they told us was we're going to need 64 beds. That was not me saying that. That was them saying that, okay? So when we first had heard that, there was a little bit of sticker shock for everybody. We're like, oh my God, that is a lot of beds. That's too many. So really, I sort of agree with you. I just don't entirely agree on the end point, I guess, is that we want to chip away at that 64 number to get down to 40. Because what I'm telling you today is we're not deciding between whether or not we can treat or whether or not we can detain. I'm telling you this is what's already occurring, okay? And what I'm telling you is, as of December 18th of this year, I will have to start sending out to other facilities an average of 10 youth per day, and these aren't just widgets, okay? They're I regularly have kids sent back to me, and they said, we don't want this one. Send us somebody else. We have youth that have excessive medical demands, mental health demands, things like that. So it's a very complex process. And we also have to use a lot of different detention facilities. In fact, we've already been over full. We've already had to use facilities back in FY19. The county spent almost $500,000 sending youth out before this law was even enacted. The county was spending that much money sending out kids to other facilities. So we had 4 separate facilities we were sending to. One is an hour away in Galesburg. Okay, that's the closest one. One's an hour and a half away, Lynn County, when they have space, and they don't have any space right now. We have another one that's 2 hours away in Montrose, and one that we used in 3 hours away in central Iowa. I can tell you he's also breaking ground on a new facility. He's going to add 20 more beds this fall, because he also understands the issue that we're up against. And if Scott County has a need, then he's going to have it. Whether we detain him here or there, what I'm saying is that we want to invest in our youth. We want our kids here, okay? Here is where their families are. Here is where their churches are and their pastors and their schools, and we want them here as opposed to far away. And I'm telling you now, there's going to be times I'm not even going to be able to keep them within 3 hours. I may have to send them 5 hours away. And that's not best practices. So I just wanted to comment on that.
I think everybody on the panel has like 3 more things they want to say, but I want to also make sure I honor the folks who have come here and have some questions. So you talked a little bit, there's so many things that I could ping pong off of that have come up here, so bear with me. I hear something thematic in some of the comments that you've made around support systems that are needed, perhaps inappropriate referrals based on behavioral or mental health needs. Nobody said substance abuse, but that could potentially be part of it too. Is there anyone on the panel that's familiar with the funding for juvenile justice in Scott County compared to funding that's provided through the county for mental health services to youth?
It's embarrassing because I sit on the state system of care for youth, and I see the gaps in the system from that perspective. But the money that we spend on juvenile justice, like I said, I get about $1 million a year, and that's done per capita. So when Mike talks about our declining child population, that money goes down every year that we lose population. But a big portion of the money that I spend is on FFT, which is functional family therapy. It's on MST, which is multisystemic therapy. It's on things that really work. MST these are both evidence-based programs that are shown to work with juvenile offenders. We spend probably about $300,000 a year on both of those, and it's going to expand, probably closer to 4. And those are the things. But we also have to do things like public safety for juvenile justice as well. I'm being honest and very serious with you when I say we have to, things like the juvenile assessment programs have to expand, and we have to do it system-wide, or we're going to keep seeing these kids as nails that need to be hammered because of their behavior. But we have to do it in a balanced way. We can't ignore public safety and say that we're just gonna focus on those things, because if we don't do both at once, if we work with kids in juvenile justice, we can turn those kids around. We now know what works with kids. We know what interventions works with criminal thinking. We can lower their risk to recidivate. But if we get those kids mixed in with mental health issues, we can't even do focused treatment with those kids, because they need something different that we can't give them. And that's where I'm coming from with this. We need both ends. We can walk and chew gum at the same time.
So I guess the follow-up question then would be like, who decides how the funding is allocated then? If you sit in your role and you understand this need, are we walking and chewing bubblegum right now? Is that already happening? Is the balance? Are we not balanced? And if not, what's the appropriate balance in terms of how funds are allocated?
Right now, the regions, the mental health regions in Iowa are going to be funded through state funding as opposed to county tax. That is going to insert a lot of money over the next 5 years into the mental health system. That, we're going to be able to chew a lot of gum with that money. So the bottom line is that we need, right now, if we don't get another detention center, then we're out of balance. Then those kids are going to become at higher risk. We're going to have less opportunity, because we're going to break bonds with their principals. We're going to break bonds with their therapists. We're going to break bonds with their parents. Most of all, we sat and talked about how important education is and how important engagement with these kids is in the system. And we're going to move them out of our system. I mean, that's going to happen on December 18th. So yeah, we're walking and chewing gum, but we have to constantly work to keep it in balance. And if we don't have another detention center, we're out of balance.
Marcy, I'm trying to read your face. Did you have something? Okay. How can Scott County have the number of beds 40 to 60 when the cap in beds for the state is so low?
So just to give you a little bit of history, the state code does include a state bed cap for detention beds across the state. Okay, so the current cap is 272. That was actually legislation that was written by a group that I was on. Okay, that was written by detention directors, and the reason for that is we don't want, the way that detentions are funded is mostly by the county, but we also receive state funding, okay, which usually amounts to around $4 million a year that we split up among all the detention centers. So what we didn't want is people coming here and building unnecessary detention centers and trying to pull away resources from the state for those construction costs for detention centers that are not necessary. So that's just a little bit of history of where that cap comes from. We were the ones that did that. So anyway, so we have actively been working with detention directors and also DHS. DHS is in charge of distributing and allocating beds. And I can sit here and tell you that even though that I was currently at its cap, that's just the number that we came up with at the time, I'm very confident that we will have beds allocated before we break ground. It's not an easy process, I'm sorry. It's not something we can do overnight. We have to be able to provide a need, and we have to meet with folks through DHS and the legislature so they understand the need. And I can tell you we are actively working with those folks, and I can tell you that DHS understands our need. Thank you.
So if I'm making sure I understand, so I can make sure the question gets answered in a way that's meaningful to whoever asked, I heard somebody say something. So is there a process by which you have to go about through the state in order to get approval to expand with the current? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. That's
Okay,
kind of-
okay, okay. So that's the process we're currently going through. Okay. Couple of questions. I know we have some kiddos here from a youth program. I want to honor that program at least by name. What's the name of the program? Ann's program?
Project Renewal.
Project Renewal. And I know if you guys could see this little cute child handwriting, but there's also an adult who asked a similar question. So I'm going to read both of them. Can you make it somewhere else? And the other one was, why not expand the existing juvenile detention center to the north instead of building near one of the hearts of Davenport in a residential area?
In terms of site selection, the site has not been selected. We have a few different sites that have been talked about, but right now we're in the design phase for the facility. Once the design phase is complete, we'll know what the footprint is and we'll know how big the land is. There's also, and I'm sorry, I'm not the facility person. I'm honestly just a glorified youth counselor, so bear with me. But basically, they have to go out and they have to look at the ground and make sure that they can build on it and things like that. So there's different sites that are being looked at right now, but it has not been selected at this point.
So I know that there was a question, I have so many nice cards up here. There was a question about pulling from best practices in other areas. Given some of the data that we've heard about where Iowa is situated, I think I'm going to make it a two-part question. Marcy, if you can share with us some best practices that maybe you know from across the country, given the work that you do across the country, and then if you can, either Scott or Jeremy, if you could share a little bit about if there are any of those practices that she mentions that we are currently doing, and to what extent they are having success. That covers about 3 questions that are in there.
So I want to be really clear. Scott and Jeremy are doing best practice. They are matching the level of risk with the dose of programming, what they say. So if you have a low risk kid, they're having no touch with the system. That's the right thing. Scott just talked about things: family functional therapy, multi-systemic therapy, all evidence-based practice. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Restorative justice, diversion. This is my point. My point is these guys could walk and do the best job of anyone in the world. It's not going to solve the problem. We're asking the wrong question. The question I have is, what is going on? Why do we have black youth so overrepresented in a system that we clearly have figured out what to do with the white kids, right? They're not matriculating like that. So why can't we apply those same practices? It's about equity. Why are we, I just heard Scott say that really good things. Mental health care, shifting to state payment, that's going to expand opportunity to provide mental health services. All that MFT, FMT stuff. Assessment center, millions of dollars, 2.5 million you said in the next year. Commitment to assessment, early intervention. Get kids to the assessment center, get them into those services early. Diversion, no contact, no formal contact. Win, win, win. Restorative justice in the schools, win. How do we pair all of that with a doubling the size of the bed? I am not hearing anyone in here saying that they don't want a facility that is designed, that encourages humanity, children to have access to their education and their families. I'm not hearing not to build, which I am hearing everywhere else in the country. But I'm not hearing that here. I am hearing, please don't build a 40-bed facility that is expandable to 60. And I will tell you one thing, 40 kids who are all traumatized, who have all experienced violence, who many of whom are charged with serious offenses, putting them all together in one spot, what do you think that does? Not a good idea, folks. Not a good idea. So all I'm saying is, before we break down, Jeremy's going to deal with these 24 kids. My hope, we're 25 kids in an 18-bed facility. Some kids are going to leave in the short term. Some kids are going to be sent on to Scott County, unless Scott County makes different decisions. Who's your DA? Who's your judges? Who's your sheriff? You guys vote for those people every other year? Vote. Ask them about youth justice. What are they doing for the black community and black children in Scott County?
Marcy, thank you. I think it's important that people understand, you've mentioned it a couple times, but where the two of you are situated in this conversation. And I think, like I mentioned at the beginning, I worked in schools. I wish we had this many parents at parent-teacher conferences. This is the type of thing that you need to show up for, not just here, but also at the polls. Right? So thank you.
So I'd just like to answer and play and add to what you're saying. What we need in our community is what we have in juvenile justice right now, only we need it in a social service way. We need to get the families that need the service and offer it to them in a way that they can accept it. We need to get out there and find out, how do we engage with families? How are we not engaging with families right now? And how are we allowing families to sit until the problems become so big that we're answering it with juvenile justice? The question I think we need to answer, and I disagree that we need, I think we do need 40 beds, but I think we also need to look in the mirror. This is what juvenile justice did in 2007. We had to look in the mirror and say, what are we doing wrong? What are the best practices we're missing? Where are we missing the boat with our families? Let's make it better. Let's see the blemishes and get better. And we've done so steadily. We need to look as a community and as service-giving organizations, how do we reach out and engage in a way that doesn't push away? Because that's what's happening. We can't push families away from the services they need.
Okay, I'm going to ask 2 more questions, and then I have 2 or 3 youth that I'm just going to give about 3 minutes for them to be able to speak. Why do we get to use, or why are we asking for $4.5 million? I think they're referring to the ARPA dollars for youth detention when there are organizations that work on keeping kids out in the first place. Can the funds be used, or at least a portion of the funds be used there?
Okay, so in terms of like ARPA funding, I know there's been a lot of talk about the ARPA funding. So there's $33 million that the county is receiving, just like other municipalities in this area have received for federal COVID relief in different areas. So there's a lot of different types of things that that can be used for. Right now, and like I said, this is a question for your county board of supervisors. Okay. So they have the ultimate say-so in where this money goes. But what I can tell you is their #1 strategic priority is to make sure that we have enough detention bed space to accommodate the demand. And that's why we are currently exploring how those relief funds can be used within a facility. And I can tell you how they can. For example, right now we don't have an outside courtyard area for youth to go into. So that can help fund something like that, so youth can go outside and they can breathe air and they can spread out. Social distancing, COVID mitigation. Other things would be like a virtual courtroom. So in case the courts shut down like they did last year, that we can continue to have detention reviews. They can continue to meet with attorneys and things like that. Right now we've just sort of got a computer in a closet. So that would offer a lot more opportunities there. We also would be able to eliminate double bunks. Right now we have to put some kids together in the same room, so that would mitigate some COVID there. So there is some reasons why we would use that money. In terms of like other programs, I do believe that evidence-based programs can apply for that funding. I'm not sure the process of that. But
so it sounds like to me, thank you for answering on behalf of maybe some elected officials. So just trying to, again, your elected officials are probably who you need to ask some of these questions to, but they're trying their best. This is a more specific question, and whoever wrote this, I'm going to try to pare it down just a bit for the sake of time, and also because some of the comments have already been referenced in prior remarks. Essentially, this individual's indicated that they are speaking from experience with their child who was just as impacted and was in the juvenile detention center. At the time when their child was going through numerous different interventions, there was a lot of obvious burden, emotional and psychological ramifications for the family. They spent a significant amount of time at the juvenile detention center and with the Scott County system as a whole over 6 or 7 years. They asked for mentorship, mental health services for his PTSD, also help for support for his substance abuse, and no significant programs were offered by his probation officer or the school probation liaison. Can you please tell us a little bit more about the diversion programs and how they would look in this new facility? And do they embrace the whole family or whole family issues?
I'm a little surprised about that. I'd like to, if you find me after this, talk to me, because I'd like to know where we missed with that, because we fund substance abuse services. He does not like me. I have a problem. Yeah, you working that over there. But we do fund that, and we have diversion programs, substance abuse diversion programs. We have, like I said, no first-time misdemeanor is sees the adult, sees the court in Scott County. We have enabled our liaisons to go out and make referrals for our MST and FFT programs to get into the homes, so we can get into homes of at-risk kids before they hit our system. So I think I could learn a lot from whoever wrote that, and really fill some gaps. I started out tonight saying I hope I learned as much as the information as I can share, and I hope I can fill those gaps, because I don't like to hear that. Our goal is to get to these kids before they see our system and get them out of our system as soon as we can.
Sure, Mike.
Thank you. When we talk about these diversion programs, and we talk about chewing gum, and we talk about walking and all this at the same time, the money has to come from somewhere, and the Board of Supervisors promised us through these meetings that we had that we were going to get those diversion programs. But no funds have been allocated. What we have is grant money for those, and when that dry up, what happens? And you probably can't answer that, but I got a problem with that. And then when we talk about the fact that we would use part of the facility for diversion and things of this nature, the problem I have with that is that the Board of Supervisors is going to dictate that we use up space for beds rather than diversion programs, because they haven't kept their promise to give us the money that they talked about from the beginning.
No, I thought you might.
That's not a Jeremy thing. So I guess one thing I want to offer, before I approach the youth that are going to talk just briefly, is I do think I've learned a lot. First of all, I appreciate all of you for your time. I appreciate you. These are not easy issues. They're complex problems, and they don't have easy solutions, but it's going to take all of us. I appreciate all of you showing up. I've learned a lot from this, and I can't tell you, having been just as impacted, I had an opportunity to write a victim impact statement. And I can tell you at the time that I wrote that statement, I'm probably in a different place now than I was then. And I can also say to you, in a victim impact statement, you get an opportunity to just kind of express your grievance, essentially. and maybe to a certain degree what you want to see happen or how you were obviously impacted. I think if I were aware that there were other programs and I had an opportunity to weigh in, not just from a space of anger and frustration and quite frankly anxiety and trauma, I might have probably offered something different than just what I did right? And so I think another way to let people know, because I hear people in our community, there's this narrative around kids do things because they don't have any consequences. And that is when you are on the victim side of it and newly traumatized, I can understand how a person would feel that way. When we know that data shows us that there's usually a much bigger picture behind the scenes that's causing them to act in that way. There's personal choice in there as well, so I don't want to take that away from anybody. But I'm going to step over to a couple of the youth. I think there's 2 or 3. They're going to make brief remarks. Yeah, come on up. And then, Henry? Was Henry? Are you coming?
I'll go out there.
Okay.
Hi everybody, I'm Kylan Phillips. I go to Davenport Central High School here, and I've been living here my whole life. I'm going to start off by saying I'm going to be saying a speech today. So home is where the heart is. When I was young and naive, this place felt like home. I would love to have that pride again in my community, but I cannot ignore that this county isn't wanting it for itself. They know about the bad things going on, but make minimal efforts to change the space and make it a home. It seems like they want to run it downhill, and what hurts most for a kid like me is that all the kids that are getting locked up look like me. In Iowa, we are more than double the national average for locking up black and brown children disproportionately. And knowing what I know about the incarceration system and the revenue it can bring, I can only imagine that this is about money, and it's a money scheme. I want to think more of my community, but as I grow, I notice the community is not growing with me. We've in fact moved backwards in progression of the community and youth education here. Education is important because it brings out the best in everyone, especially the youth. We are starting to misunderstand the value of teachers, and they do not feel respected in these hard times. The youth is directly affected because the lack of respect to teachers leaves them treating teaching as a 9-to-5 job. With an understaffed school and a large enrollment of students, we cannot blame them, but we should help them. Many kids don't feel school is for them because they cannot get one-on-one help they need to figure out what path they would like to take. Now more than ever, we are confused on what they want to do, and if you're a kid with bad options, you can tend to choose a bad choice. We aren't all born with the same options or choices, so I think we should focus on opening up more good opportunities for kids, and we should open up better choices for them to make. Now more than ever, we stay home due to the pandemic, and the environment you grow in influences your decisions in the future. If a kid walks in their neighborhood and only sees liquor stores, homeless shelters, and large juvenile detention centers, they will think that those places are meant for them, and that's where they're supposed to be. I don't want to waste the potential this place has, and we need to focus our time on helping the youth and helping them find their worth, purpose, and most importantly, their home in Davenport, Iowa. Thank you for listening, and I want to make this place a home.
Alright, hello everybody, my name is Henry Justin. I'm a senior at Davenport Central just like Kylan is. First off, I'd just like to say I understand that you guys aren't elected officials and can't answer some of the questions and statements that I provide for you, but you do have connections and influence to those officials who can do that for us. So with that, I would like to say, as the terms of the Juvenile Detention Center are being discussed, I keep hearing the same question in my head. Why do we need a bigger juvenile center? If our city's correction system is successful, then why do we have such a disproportionate amount of minors, especially the minority minors, being put in the juvie system? Or is it the number of troubled youth that is so high that the services provided by the county are so overwhelmed that they have no choice but to send them for a stay in a corrections facility? If this is the case, then we are blatantly failing our own community. If we really need more beds, then why would the county not first, before spending millions of dollars on an expanded facility, put a percentage of these funds into local preventers and outreach groups to prevent the children from going into the system, instead of prepping for a surplus of juvenile crimes? It is a proven fact that outreach programs work to prevent minors from entering the system, and it seems like everywhere I look, the answer to our juvenile crime program is not making a bigger facility. Building a facility of this size is admitting to our community that we're incapable of providing the services to help and support our children. Placing it right in the middle of an impoverished community is telling our children, especially minority, that this is all you're worth, this is where you belong. Is this really the message that we want to send to our community who's struggling? I agree that the new juvenile detention facility is needed, as our current facility is outdated for our current demands. But I do not agree with the idea that it needs to be substantially bigger than today's. Everything about this plan raises red flags for me. The increased size, the improbable price, and the location are just a few of them. If you really have the best interests of our community at heart, then you would devote funds to our community problems.
I'm a Davenport native and a 2021 Davenport North High School graduate. I'm currently a student at Western Illinois University, and I'm majoring in elementary education with a minor in ESL, which is teaching English as a second language. I'm here because I am passionate about our community's children, and my big heart wants to see as many of them flourish as possible. With that being said, spending over $16 million of county funds towards expanding our juvenile detention center will not create that result. The Scott County Board of Supervisors are sending our children a message. They are telling our children, we know you aren't going to succeed, so we're building more prison beds for you boys and girls to sleep in. If we all have the same goal, to help improve the lives of children in our community, we need to be focused on prevention, not detention. Education, not incarceration. In the Scott County Juvenile Detention's 2020 annual report, the center reported that the amount of children who needed to be detained decreased dramatically from 2019 to 2020. When citing the reason, the report states this can be attributed in part to diversion programs implemented by Scott County as well as other local nonprofit providers. If it is known that investing in prevention program decreases the amount of children who need incarceration, this is where the money needs to be spent. Prevention starts in the schools and throughout the community as a whole. Prevention starts with us taking action as a community, like voting on November 2nd for regular city and school board elections in Scott County. But we can't control what happens inside the homes. We can control how children are supported by their schools and communities. According to a recent study by the National Council on Crime and Delinquency, most kids entering juvenile detention have been disadvantaged by poverty and lack of resources. And more than 70% have mental health disorders that often go unseen and untreated. We all know how expensive therapy can be and how inaccessible it can be to people who come from families who aren't privileged. We need city-based programs that enter into schools and help children in the community properly address the hardships they're facing. We need people who encourage our children to build a better future for themselves. Instead of cycling children in and out of the detention center, let's help them beat the odds and become more self-sustainable citizens. Instead of investing in the criminalization of children, why not step up and help them not go down that path? Help be the change. Because once you've entered into the system, no one teaches you the tools needed to stay out of it long term. It becomes a cycle, and a cycle that needs to be broken. According to a recent sentencing project, no state in the country has placed higher proportion of black youth in juvenile facilities than Iowa. A review of statewide data from 2016 to 2019 shows the racial disparity was the highest in Scott County. In the current Scott County Juvenile Detention Center's 2020 annual report, it stated that black children made up 70% of the children they detained. These statistics highlight a major issue. Children that look like me are continuously being failed by our leaders, the justice system, and the public school system. Youth have little to no representation in public schools. Only 7% of public school teachers are Black in America. 7%. Students in the classroom need educators who can relate to their struggles and encourage them to become something greater than what the system believes they are. Children need community leaders who look like them, can relate to them, and see them as children rather than criminals. Students should be educated and not incarcerated. The school to prison pipeline is where children are funneled out of public schools and into the juvenile and criminal justice system. This pipeline truly begins with inadequate public schools. Funding is a huge issue for these institutions, and $16.8 million could provide them with proper assistance. There's inadequate services for counseling, special education, and numerous other additional resources that these children need. We have students getting kicked out and expelled from school when those should be the last and final resorts. This just leads to more dropout rates because once students continuously experience this punishment, they'll become discouraged to even continue schooling. Schools rely on officers to solve problems, when in reality it should be the teachers and administrators' job to maintain discipline. They know these students. School-based arrests just lead to becoming a part of the juvenile justice system. Students who are entered into juvenile detention centers face many barriers to their re-entry into traditional schools. Everyone is aware that these children are already at risk with learning disabilities and other educational struggles, and sadly, it seems that the county's remedy is to still lock these children up instead of providing them with opportunities to better themselves. Juvenile detention centers can be an ineffective solution. They increase the likelihood of juveniles returning back to the system because they don't rehabilitate these children. They punish and criminalize them. If you want to see the change and actually help the children in our community, the $16.8 million needs to be used for education, prevention. It's trial and error, and the data does not lie. It seems the facts show our leaders are more focused on money than helping our children. Let's all do better, Scott County. This is my teacher voice. Thank you.
As well as 11:30. Please take refreshments on your way out if you would like. Thank you.